Imagine if you had the ability to hear an entire piece of music, every note, every chord, every rhythm, without ever touching your instrument. This is the power of audiation. This is when you have the ability to hear things internally. It's really the secret ingredient for the most successful musicians. And we're going to be talking about this today, and I want to dive into how you can actually develop this ability for yourself. Before we start talking about audiation, I think it's important for you to know that it is not the only thing you need to be successful as a composer or a musician, but it is a critical aspect of what we do in the musical world. If you're going to compose music, if you can audiate what you want to write before you actually sit down and commit it to paper, you already have an advantage because you can preview the music in your mind. And what often happens is you start to become more creative. I often see in my composition studio students who will come in and they will write really effective pieces. The melodies are usually original, but they will try and insert chord progressions that are common to the classical or even the romantic period with not much embellishment. They'll very much write 1 4 5 1, maybe throw in a 6 chord tonic substitute every now and then, maybe some secondary dominants if they're really creative. But they think that the way to make better music is to use more music theory. And that's not really how you develop your own personal style. The way that you develop your own style is by actually listening to music internally and trusting what you're hearing. But how do you get there is by studying a lot of music theory, counterpoint, orchestration. And once you take all this information into your mind and it becomes sort of a part of your existence, it becomes part of your foundational knowledge, it comes out in very interesting ways, in unique and creative ways that are specific to you. And so composition can be a little bit like a fingerprint, where you start to write music that sounds like you, and other people can hear that it is you. If you think about Beethoven or Mozart, those are two similar composers that use a lot of similar chord progressions, but the way that they use them, the way that they create their melodies, what they put into their music is very different. And so we can hear a piece by Mozart and Beethoven and know the difference. We can say that's Mozart, that's Beethoven. This is Schoenberg. This is Messiaen. Whatever composer you have, they have their own unique style, and it is not firmly rooted in classical music theory, but they all learned theory and counterpoint. So one of the things that I do with my students is I teach them audiation, of course, which is what we're going to be talking about today. But before I even get there, we have to make sure that they have the fundamentals covered over the course of lessons. So I start them with audiation training, we move into counterpoint, form and analysis. And what this does is it teaches them everything they need to know. They need to know how multiple independent melodic lines can work together to create harmony, not how harmony magically comes together and creates melody. It doesn't work that way. If you write a 1 4 5 1 progression, there's a melody in there, but it's, if you're in the key of C, it's C, F, G, C. That's the melody. You know, if you go to the third of the line, maybe you have a C, C, B, C. That's your melody. It's not very creative and it is restricted by these chord progressions. But what happens is if you take all this knowledge internally and then you also develop the ability to audiate, you will be able to start creating unique music to you because nobody thinks quite like you do. And so by your very nature, if you're writing music that is coming to you somewhat naturally, you're going to write original music. Whether or not it's good, that's an entirely different thing. But there are also secrets to writing music that people respond to. There's a fine line between too little repetition and too much. And you also need to know how to develop your ideas, how to articulate them in a way where your audience can pay attention and listen and walk away thinking, that's a melody I can't get out of my head. You know, kind of like, I hate this word, but earworm, you know? It's something that just sticks in your mind. And so you can develop these abilities, but ultimately your style is going to be unique to you. And so what's one of the best ways to ensure you're creating music that is true to you? Forget about the theory. Forget about the orchestration. Forget about the counterpoint. You pour all that information into your brain, into like a little container here, and then it sort of infuses into your body. And when it comes back out as a composition, it shows its face when necessary, but it doesn't necessarily dictate the way a composition flows. Your natural predisposition for writing melodies does that. So the way that we do this is through something called audiation. We have to learn the fundamentals, and my composition students, like I said, they have to go through audiation, counterpoint, form. They have to go through all the standard techniques, but I use courses for that. So I push them through these courses, and then in private lessons, we continually try to develop their ideas. But audiation is a critical factor. And recently, I was doing a composition seminar with some of my students, and we started talking about audiation. And I asked the students, how many of you can audiate? Well, they all can because I'm teaching that. That's a fundamental thing of what I do in composition lessons. But what surprised me was that a lot of them, they're not audiating with the pure instrument sounds, violins, pianos, drums. They're hearing kind of this hazy sound, this idea of a sound. Like you can hear a drone, but it's non-specific. It's kind of generic. And maybe they put another part on top of it, but that other part doesn't have its own timbre, its own instrument color, its own color, like a violin or a clarinet, that's timbre. And this is a critical aspect of audiation, is the ability to actually hear individual instruments. And so one of the techniques you can do to actually develop that is to listen to a solo piano work and then audiate something original and try and replicate the sound of that piano. You can't simply recall a piece you've already heard. It has to be original. If you recall a piece that you've already heard, what you're doing is using some sort of mental recall. The music has been put together for you. You're not putting in that effort. When audiation really becomes powerful is when you are actually creating something new with distinct instrument sounds. And so that is one of the things that I work on with students, is the ability to start to develop this recall of individual sounds. And it comes later, because first you want to get to the point where you can actually hear multiple independent lines, which most of my students can do at this point. The newer ones are still working on it, but those that have been with me a while, they definitely have an ability to audiate. But I have to work with them on hearing the individual instrument timbres. So you listen to a recording, and then you audiate something original with the sound from that recording. And then you get a solo flute, unaccompanied piece, and you listen to the sound of the flute, and then you try and audiate it. It starts simple like this, and then we can do more complex exercises to make it a little more robust and to build out your audiation abilities. But audiation is one of those things where if you don't practice it pretty regularly, it doesn't develop that quickly. But if you do, it's one of those skills that can develop very quickly for most people. And so it's actually not that hard of a thing to do, because unlike ear training where you have to verify and check, with audiation, the only thing that matters is, can I hear my original music in my head? Can I hear what I'm going to improvise in my head before I play it? And is it accurate? Is the sound accurate? The aspect of ear training that comes into play will help you to make sure that you're identifying the individual notes you're hearing, but audiation itself is just about the sound. Ear training helps us pick apart that sound and notate what we're hearing. So there's multiple aspects to audiation. So the idea here is that with audiation, what you're trying to develop is the ability to hear internal melodies, harmonies, and rhythms, the entire composition before playing, singing, or composing, before writing it down. But I want to make this point one more time. It's not about recalling a song in your head. However, if you can recall one of your favorite songs with all the instrumentation, that's a good sign, because it shows that you do have that ability. You should actually try this. At some point, close your eyes. You can do it now while I'm talking to you. And think of a very familiar song, one of your favorite songs or pieces. I say songs have words, pieces don't. Okay. So think of something that's really familiar to you, and try and recall in as much detail as you can just the first few seconds of it. Could you do it? If not, that's okay. If you could, that's okay too. It just means that if you can, you do have this ability to recall individual instruments. If you couldn't, you probably never tried this before. It's a completely new exercise for you, and I suggest trying it. Listen to a piece that you've heard multiple times and see if you can replicate it. That's not audiation. That's sort of a mental recall, kind of an echoing in the mind, but it is an indication of what you can hear. So let's talk a little bit about why audiation actually matters. It's really essential for developing a strong musical ear, creative intuition, and memory. So we know that musicians who have a really strong musical memory tend to do better in ear training, perfect pitch training, relative pitch training, hearing chord progressions, dictations, all the things that musicians are expected to be able to do on some level. Memory is one of the most important aspects of it. So you want to constantly try to increase your musical memory. That's why in my flawless ear training course, what I have at the end, and this is something we need to be very clear about, there's dictations with anywhere from 8 measures to 16 measures. They're long, you know, and I don't expect the students to be able to memorize them. What I expect is each day you come in to a flawless ear training lesson. When you get to the dictation, you try and remember one note more than the previous day. You always just push yourself to hear that extra note or that extra measure. What we're doing is gradually increasing your memory. We don't care if you can memorize the entire dictation. I will tell you, you can go ahead and try and notate it or take a screenshot of the dictation, and you can try and memorize it visually and then hold that in your memory, come back the next day and see if you can remember the dictation. That will help with your memory. But ultimately, you don't even have to do that. You just want to push yourself to focus on this exercise and see if on day one you can remember 2 notes. On day two, maybe you can remember 3. And then on day 4, you remember 2 again. On day 5, you get 3 again. On day 6, maybe you push it to 4. On day 7, you go back to 2. It's not a straightforward process, but we're always trying to just gradually increase our musical memory. And we do it gently. We don't push it. We don't force it. We just focus. Focus is the key here. Audiation, as I'm sure you're aware, it also enables musicians to compose, improvise, and interpret music more deeply. Imagine if you're playing in an orchestra and you see your part in front of you, or you're playing in a big band, or you're playing solo piano, or you're about to sing. What if before you even played a note, you could imagine the contour of the melody? You could see what's coming next in your music, listen to what's going on around you, and see how your part fits in the ensemble. Audiation does that. And this is something we don't talk about a lot. We always talk about scales and technique and key signatures, and we talk about how to get better at your instrument. Hopefully, we talk about how you can get the best sound on your own individual instrument, but we don't really talk about how to think ahead in music. If you speak, and this can take some practice, if you just speak without thinking about the next thing you're going to say, you tend to ramble, you know? So you can develop the ability to kind of preview what you're going to say before you say it. The same is true with music. If you can look at the music on the page and you can audiate what it should sound like before you actually play it, that will help you perform at a higher level. So to give an example, I play euphonium. So let's say I'm in measure 1. I'm sitting here in real time playing measure 1. I'm also thinking about what measure 2 sounds like before I play it. And I'm constantly maybe a measure or a phrase ahead. And this may sound like a really complex thing to do, but it's one of those things that just takes practice. Just like when you first picked up your instrument, you didn't immediately play Carnival of Venice, or some really complex piece. You had to start with simple tunes, simple scales, you learned your fingerings, and then gradually over weeks and months and years, you became really proficient at your instrument. But if you weren't developing this preview ability and you weren't developing your audiation along the way, you're just missing a component of musicianship that makes music more enjoyable. You'll get more out of it. So audiation is critical for that. And it really helps you to improvise. Improvisation is huge. Now, with improvisation, it's not just audiation, it's also ear training. So you need both. With composition, you can get away with just audiating, and then you sit there and maybe it takes you an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours to notate a single measure because you don't have a really good ear, you haven't developed your relative pitch, but you can do it because you can do it in non-real time. With improvising, you have to be able to do it in real time, so that's why you need a fast ear too. So when you can audiate clearly what you want to play, even hear it against the orchestra. Let's say it's a chord progression, you got a lead sheet and you see the chords laid out in front of you. You can preview those chords because of your ear training and because of your audiation, and you can actually play different melodies on top of it. And if you can stay a measure ahead, guess what? You are not relying on memorized licks and memorized patterns that so many people use. You listen to the great jazz musicians, and they'll do things that are unexpected. You know, you listen to people in college and you can tell after hearing a few of their performances, they've got a few patterns. They've got a few tricks to fill in the space between chords, And it's fine, it's great, it's interesting, but it could be better if they developed both their ear and their audiation training. And here's the thing, you can get overwhelmed because as I'm talking about this, you're thinking, well, I'm never going to be able to achieve that level. Don't worry about that. Music is not about competing with anyone but yourself. You only have to do better than you did yesterday. Okay? That's all you can ask. And even if you don't do better than you did yesterday, you still try to. You know, you come in every day, you put in the effort, and you just work on the skills you know you need to work on. And it's holistic. It's not just technique. It's not just tone production. It's not just ear training. It's not just audiation. It's everything. And the real issue here, it's kind of funny, but audiation is something that my students who are hobbyists actually develop quicker. And I think the reason for that is if you're a working musician, you're a working musician. That's what you're doing all the time. You're practicing your music, you're getting ready for the next performance, you're performing, you're busy. And so you're sitting here thinking, I don't have time to add these extra things into my routine. And you're making money as a musician. So why should you? It's the hobbyists that actually have the time to develop the skills that the professional musicians need. And so it's kind of a funny thing how that works, but it's just how it is. So if you're a working musician, you have to decide, why does it matter? And is that important to me? And that's why I'm spending so much time talking about the benefits and trying to convince you that actually you will change the way that you respond to music and what you get out of music if you can develop these skills. It's really important. It's really critical because these skills, you can practice technique 20, 40 hours a day. You can practice technique 40 hours a day. Obviously, that's impossible. But you can do that and you still won't develop audiation skills or this foundation to get you to that next level. So if you've discovered that, hey, you know what, I've got all this skill, I have plateaued, it's time to go into maintenance skill on your instrument and start to develop your inner ear and take your ear as far as you can. And it doesn't take much. It's an hour a day if you're serious. If you're wanting to just kind of dabble in it and just gradually increase, that's great too. You can see results in 15 to 30 minutes a day. And that's why I have the video version of the Flawless course. In some ways, even though it's intended for professional musicians, the hobbyists are going to enjoy that more. But then you also have the audio version of it. The audio is no more than 20 minutes through unit 3, and then unit 4 it goes up to about 25. So I try to keep those really efficient and really practice based. Like you go in, you get the work done. There's not a lot of talking from me. I'm just giving you instructions for each exercise and you go. And that's the Flawless course. And then on top of that, you can take my composing hour course where there's a 40-minute session once a week that kind of gives you the information you need. It's a training session. And then I have a little 7-minute maintenance session you can use each day. So total work, if you're in the first 3 units of Flawless, is less than 30 minutes a day. So if you're a professional musician, you can find 30 minutes a day, and it doesn't have to be every day, but every day is better. I mean, this is your craft. You're going to see the best results when you do it every day. At most, you'll be spending 40 minutes. And on days when you can, you do the full composing hour 40-minute session, okay? Because what the composing hour does real quick, it's what I'm teaching my composition students. It starts with audiation. It's very gentle. You listen. There are no assignments to take home with you. You just listen. You respond. The tape's over. The audio's over. The recording's over. You're done. And you download it to your phone. That's what I like about the audio version of Flawless too. For both Composing Hour and Flawless, they're audio files. They're albums on your phone. You just click play. So if you're waiting in the DMV and you have some headphones and your phone, you can start listening to some ear training. If you're driving across the country, you can do your 40-minute session in the car. And when you combine the 40 plus the 20, you end up with an hour maximum. So not really trying to promote that necessarily, but I'm trying to tell you that you don't need that much time to develop this kind of what I believe to be a life-changing ability. So this audiation ability is really important because it sets a foundation for advanced skills like transcription, arranging, and analysis. All important things if you want to get the most out of music. And the thing is, if you're working so hard as a working musician that you don't have time to continually develop your skills outside of your instrument, like develop the actual person that's playing the music, I mean, spoiler, this is a little bit of a spoiler alert, but your instrument is not the musician. You are the musician. Your brain, your ability to process audio, process sound, and then interpret it and put it through whatever instrument you play, that's what makes you a musician. If it was just your instrument and developing technique, AI is going to do that just fine. But if you want to create something original, you want to do something that pulls on your own life experiences, you want to do something that really tells a story about where you've been and where you're going, that's where audiation serves as a critical aspect of your training. So there's a few misconceptions. We have the image of Beethoven banging his head against the wall and just trying to hear this music in our head. There was a movie with Beethoven. It was a movie about Beethoven. I don't remember what it was called, but he was in his study and you could see the notes flying around the room and he was imagining his music. And so we attribute that to him being a genius. We have that scene. It's dramatic because we think that this is a special kind of skill that only Beethoven had. The truth is, most people can develop it. And it goes back to that thing where, can you hear anything in your head? Can you hear a song in your head? Can you hear a simple lullaby? Can you hear somebody else's voice in your head? Can you hear the sound of a train? Can you hear the sound of someone you know really well? If you say yes to any of this and you can hear internally, can you even change your voice's inflection a bit in your head? If you can do that, then audiation is something you can develop. It's not only for naturally gifted musicians. It's a skill that anyone can practice. Edwin Gordon, he's the person that coined the term audiation in the 80s, and he does it from the standpoint of children. It's to teach children music. He never really ventured into teaching adults music, which is what I'm doing. I'm taking audiation kind of to the next level, and I'm showing you how to hear sound in your head. You hear something out there, you take it inside, you replicate it with as much detail as possible. Other people, another misconception is that some people believe you need perfect pitch or really great ear to start. You don't. Reading music, like that's a C, that's a D, that's an E. I don't know what it sounds like because I don't have perfect pitch, but that's C, D, and E. And basic playing skills are enough to get started. All you need is an ability to hear and understand essentially the names of the notes on the staff system. And that's why I created the Staff Speaks. Also, my musical core will go into a little more in depth, that playlist over on YouTube. But the Staff Speaks will teach people how to read music in the treble bass and the C clefs. It's 90 days. You just do one lesson a day. You don't even care if you're getting 100%. There's enough exercises and repetition in there that by the end of it, you should achieve the goal, which is very simple. In 90 days, identify notes on the staff in all the major clefs. And that may seem simple because there's only 7 notes, right? 12 if you count the chromatic notes, 15 if you end up going with all the enharmonic ones. But it's not so simple. And I did it because when I taught in the university, I would see students come in and they'd be fine in the treble clef. They'd be writing their chords and writing their intervals and doing all their theory homework in the treble clef just fine. But the moment they tried to go into the bass clef or the clef that wasn't native, they slowed down significantly and they dreaded it. And so what I've done is this 90-day course where everything's less than 10 minutes. They're short. And you just come in daily, get through the 90 days, and you will have a better ability to read music. And then from there, the idea is you don't stop. You're not done. You now start to advance your skills. So if you're an entry-level person who's just getting into this, Staff Speaks is a way to start. And people sometimes get caught up in the ear train aspect of it. Don't even worry about that. The ear train aspect is just getting you to listen to sound. It is a primer that prepares you to start hearing music differently. When you get into the flawless course, which would be the next step in the series, that's when we develop your ear. The Staff Speaks was not meant to do that, but as a way to make it a little more fun, a little more engaging, I'll have you try and hear the C as you see it on a staff. Little exercises like that. So it's just kind of a more interesting way, and they're short. It's only 10 minutes a day. You can get in, get out. And you learn a lot about music. You learn about things like inharmonicity. You learn about the staff system, a little of the history. What's the difference between a pitch and a note? you know? Yeah, sure. A note, somebody commented on this, and it was a good point, but a note has duration as well as pitch. So what I said was, a note is what you see, a pitch is what you hear. At this level in the course, that is true. As you get out into the world, you start playing music, of course, you start to realize that a note could be a quarter note, half note, or a whole note, and now it has duration. But when I say play the note C, I don't care about duration, right? So I don't say play the pitch C. I say play the note C. When you play it, it then becomes a pitch. So little distinctions like this. We can start to argue about that, but it doesn't matter. A note's a note. It's what we see. A pitch is what we hear. Ultimately, at the most basic level. I try not to complicate things. So the truth is, it's not, audiation's not only for the naturally gifted, and it's not for people with perfect pitch or that have a great ear. All those things can help. But honestly, if you're gonna, I did a 30-day challenge where I tried to develop perfect pitch, and I'm still doing it daily to see if it can be developed. I don't care about perfect pitch, but perfect pitch is one of those things that everybody's so fascinated by. I kind of want to see if I spend a couple years on it, can I develop it, and how well can I develop it? So I'm doing that as a test, and I'm the test subject. And I'm one person, so it's very anecdotal. But if I can develop it, because I don't have perfect pitch, then I figure, well, maybe there is a chance to develop it. So you can follow along with that playlist if you want. It's on YouTube. It's Perfect Pitch Challenge on my YouTube channel at UreMusic, URE Music. You can check that out, but don't waste your time on perfect pitch. Waste your time on relative pitch. I mean, you have to develop relative pitch before you even start thinking about perfect pitch, because when it comes down to it, there have been very few times where I have thought, oh, I need perfect pitch. Let me give you one example of when I want a perfect pitch. I was doing the graduate entrance exams for the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. And I had these question banks with over 200 questions per segment. So it was over 2,000 questions. And a lot of them were audio based. And I was pretty careful about labeling things. This is a perfect fifth, perfect fourth, things like that. But later on, I realized it would actually be helpful to know the bass note, but there's 2,000 audio files. So it would have been nice to have perfect pitch in that instance, because when I went back, make a long story short, I went back and edited them. I had to use my relative pitch and a piano to make sure I knew the root of every interval. If I knew perfect pitch, if I had perfect pitch, maybe I could have gone through and made that faster. That's a one time I needed perfect pitch. That's not really something musicians have to do, right? Because when I'm playing an ensemble, I don't care what key I'm in. Of course, if I'm playing, I need to know the sharps and flats, but I don't care from a pitch standpoint. I just know that this is where I am. This is what this melody is made up of. These are the intervals. This is what it should sound like. And I get the pitch the moment we play that first note, and then I've got the relative pitch for the rest of the piece. I don't need perfect pitch. I almost think it would get in the way. Relative pitch is very quick when you develop it to a high level. So there's also evidence that a lot of people will lose their perfect pitch in their 50s and 60s. So even if you do somehow develop it, you can lose it. It happens to a lot of musicians. I am not going to say that everybody with perfect pitch loses it. I think maybe if you keep working on it and you don't have any physical ailments that prevent you from hearing, you'll keep your perfect pitch. But I worked with this composer. His name was Don Hanna. Really excellent arranger. And when I was at UNLV, I was studying with him for a little bit. And he told me, I used to have a really good ear, a really good perfect pitch, but he lost it. He lost his perfect pitch. And he had to retrain his ear from the ground up. And part of what made him such a great arranger transcriber is that he could rely on the perfect pitch. Well, when that was gone, all of a sudden he had to put in the grunt work of learning relative pitch. And it happened to him because he had a really bad sinusitis infection, is what he told me. And ever since then, his ear just wasn't what it used to be, and he couldn't trust it the same way. And he was a famous arranger in Las Vegas and around the world. I mean, he was writing for people like Frank Sinatra. He was a big deal, So he lost it. And there are countless other examples of people that have. But also, there's a professor I worked with at UNLV. Her husband has perfect pitch in his 60s, I believe, and still has it. So your mileage may vary, but my point is, before you go off and try and develop perfect pitch, just spend some time with relative pitch. It's far more important. You're going to get better results. You're going to get faster results. Okay, but this isn't about ear training. I just wanted to mention that. Let's talk about how to start practicing audiation. Very simple. Begin with a drone. Play a single note on the piano. Hear it, sustain it. Sustain it for 10, 15 seconds. Check it on the piano. Did your tone drift? This is also ear training. If it drifted, play it again, correct yourself, keep going. Start with the drone. Then try and change the drone to different instruments. Try really hard. Listen to a piano piece. Hear the piano on a drone. This is a way of composing when you don't actually have to write anything, but it's being creative because you're taking that sound and you're repurposing it as a drone. So listen to that drone. Here's a piano. Now listen to a flute piece. Try and replicate it with the timbre of a flute. At first, it may just be this thing where it's fuzzy, there's no timbre, but keep working on it. Keep with two instruments at a time. Start with the piano, hear the piano. Then go to the flute, try and hear the flute. Piano, flute, just alternate, and spend maybe 10 minutes on this. Once you can do that, try and compose short melodic lines. Just listen internally, trying to hear them in your head without an instrument. And what I recommend is use the instrument to start with that you play, because the instrument you play is the one you're most familiar with. You play it every day. You should have some tonal memory for it. Timbre memory, maybe. But you want to start on something familiar before you branch out to new instruments. Once you can hear one timbre, the other ones start to become just a little bit easier. It's kind of like learning a language. Once you learn that first language, the other languages are supposed to be easier. I did not feel that way when I was learning German. I barely learned German. I still don't know German. And I took 2 years. I wasn't very good with languages. And it did not help me learn any other language. I moved to Japan for a couple of years and I got really good at recognizing what people were saying to me, but I just sat there saying sumimasen, sumimasen, like, the one or two phrases that I knew because I didn't know how to respond to them. But at least I was able to pick up on their language and know what they wanted from me. And sometimes it was a lot of pointing and hand gestures, or like crossing the arms, things like that. Like, we don't have anything for you here right now. So my point is, it's a bit like learning a language. Supposedly the first one's difficult. The other ones are easier once you learn that first one. So let's talk a little bit more about benefits for all musicians, not just composers. It can really help with memorization, improvisation, and your expressive performance. Imagine if you're sight reading, but you have a minute to preview. So you look at your part and you see the piano, mezzo piano, crescendos, accents. You can play through it in your mind and imagine yourself playing your instrument. That's a technique that is really valuable. If you can just imagine yourself playing your instrument and audiating it the way you want to hear it, when you actually go to your instrument, you're more likely to play it the way you heard it. So we want to be able to audiate our own instrument so that we can play more effectively. And what this does is it really just builds confidence and independence. There's going to be less reliance on sheet music and recordings because you can hear things in your head. Also, if you get lost and you have an idea of what's going on in the music and you should be playing, if you have a really good ear and really good audiation, you can fill in the blanks and make it look like you know what you're doing. Because just stopping when it's very obvious that everybody else is playing and you're looking around like, where am I? That lets people know that you made a mistake. And so one thing about being a performer is that you don't let on that you're making a mistake. This is something I really instilled in my students at the university. When we did sight singing, if they came in and made a mistake, I would tell them, you'll get a better grade if you just keep going. And one of the other instructors, Dr. Beller, actually mentioned in a meeting that all of the students that went through my class, she could tell because they would push through and treat their sight singings like a performance, which most professors appreciate because it shows that, you're developing real musicianship skills. Because that absolutely happens in performance. You make a mistake, don't let the audience know. Turn that mistake into, a thing. I remember one of my friends, Chris Castellanos, he posted on Facebook one day about how, it was a video that he did. It's kind of funny. He made a mistake. And then he was like, okay, this section's coming up again. I need to make the same mistake, because he wanted to make it seem like it was intentional. And he's very open about that. Very humble person, incredible French horn player. But that's what you do. you try and make your mistake an intentional thing. You make it part of the composition. If you're an improviser, you make a mistake, do it again. Do it 3 or 4 times. Say to the audience, this may not be what you think you want to hear, but this is what I'm going to play for you right now. This is, this was intentional. I'm doing this on purpose. So you want to develop that ability. And it really just empowers musicians to think in music. This will lead to more natural creativity and problem solving in real life performance. And it's all this audiation training, it's also supported by scientific and pedagogical processes. It has these roots. It's supported by research in music education and neuroscience. Edwin Gordon's work, he did a lot of research into this, and he created a lot of the research for it. And he demonstrated that audiation is an ability that you can train. And it is essential for children and adults. We want to get kids at all levels, adults or children. So audiation, I view it as kind of like a mental practice for athletes. Okay, you want to be able to run fast. I was in track when I was in high school, and I was actually pretty fast. My 1500 was somewhere right around the 4-minute mark. It was like 4:03 or 4:08, I forget exactly, but that's pretty fast. And we had a really good track coach. Her name was, we called her Coach Benjamin. And she did Ironman, and I think she might have done some trials for the Olympics or something at some point too. But she wouldn't just say, go run 3 miles every day to get better at running 3 miles. Just like I wouldn't tell you, go practice your instrument every day to get better at practicing your instrument. What she would do was these fundamental things. We'd run hills. We'd run sprints. We don't sprint in cross country. That's what I was involved in. But those sprints built us stronger, which made it easier to run longer distances. So you do additional exercises outside of what might be typical for your specific instrument to get better. So if you're hitting a plateau and you're wondering where to go next, the answer is really audiation. You want to push through, you want to develop these audiation skills, and you just have to make time for it. Because here's the thing that I think a lot of people miss. They think, okay, 40 minutes a day, 1 hour is what he's suggesting if I add ear training. Ooh, that's a big investment. But how many years do you plan on being a musician? It doesn't take that long. With the flawless course, if you did 1 lesson a day, you'd be done in 2 years. Uh, provided I get it all out immediately. But you'd be done in 2 years. You don't have to spend a ton of time. Because what happens is once you build that foundation, then the practice builds on it. Then your technique sessions build on it. In my opinion, you are still a student of music, even if you are practicing at the highest levels and performing at the highest levels, until you have developed audiation and developed a basic understanding of how things like the orchestra work, like orchestration, counterpoint, form. If you don't know these things, you're missing a massive aspect of your training. And I don't think that you're really at the right level yet. I don't think that you're at the level where you can explode until you have developed these skills. And audiation is part of that. It strengthens your neural pathways, it improves your musical memory, and it just makes all that hard work you do in the shedding every day, in the woodshed, it makes all of it more effective and more worthwhile. So, seek out audiation. I offer it, but you can also just start practicing on your own. And check out some of the resources I have over on YouTube. There's a lot of information on audiation, but start adding it to your routine. And the way you add things to your routine, you add a little bit at a time. Don't overwhelm yourself. Just try and do 10 minutes a day of audiation right now. So we're going to talk about some additional topics next time. I hope you can join me. And please like, subscribe, share, let other people know about this. If you have found this helpful or useful, tell me about your own experiences. Because when people share their experiences, it helps to let other people know that, hey, this is something that is worthwhile. This is something you can develop. And it creates a little bit of a sense of community, which personally I find fulfilling, because when I see people commenting, I'm like, okay, good. This is reaching people. It's helping people. That's what I'm all about here. So I will see you next time. Until then, Thank you for joining the hike. That's my new thing. I feel like this is a hike, because it is. It's not a sprint, it's leisurely. You get in, you start practicing your skills, you enjoy the journey. If you've ever been on a long hike, you know that if it's just about the destination, you're miserable getting there. You have to learn to appreciate the journey. And that's why it's not a waste of time. I hear people say, well, I can't spend an hour a day. But think of everything you're going to learn along the way. Think of all the new experiences you're going to have. It's not just about playing in music, it's also about developing your mind. I will tell you, audiation has the ability to impact other areas of your life as well. So share your stories, let me know how you're doing, and I look forward to providing you with another lesson later in the future. Thank you. By the way, we do these on Tuesdays and Fridays right now. So you can look forward to these on Tuesdays and Fridays.